Pakistan, the country, was in the news once again this week, and once again for all the wrong reasons. This time because of a suicide bomb attack and, of course, the continuing movement of Pakistan towards imminent bankruptcy, with the IMF having all sorts of questions. But I'll come to that in a little while later. Let's just return to the terror attack. A suicide bomber blew himself up inside a mosque in Pakistan. It happened in Peshawar. The afternoon prayers were on. There were more than 250 people inside the mosque when the bomber, seated on the front row of the mosque, decided to detonate his vest. A wall collapsed and fell on worshippers. The roof caved in. What happened next? Well, let's listen to some of the people who were inside the mosque.
As soon as we raised hands to say Allahu Akbar, suddenly a loud blast occurred. A huge flame came to my face and it pushed me away. I lost consciousness for 2-3 minutes. I was in the prayer hall. After I regained consciousness, after 2-3 minutes, I found myself under the rubble.
I became unconscious after the blast. After 2-3 minutes, when I regained consciousness, the roof was on top of me. I was as if glued to the ground. Allah opened a hole for me to get out. I saw the people in really bad condition in front of me.
At least 100 people died in the blast. Among them was an imam. 150 others were injured. It was the decade's deadliest blast for Pakistan. The police believe that at least 12 kilograms of explosives were used. The question being asked is whether the blast was the result of an intelligence failure. How did the attacker enter the mosque? He was apparently wearing a police uniform, but this mosque is also located inside a police compound. And reports say that the police are not ruling out inside help. We've seen protests. We've seen some unprecedented protests by the police after this entire attack. Now, it is being said by some that people in positions of power may have helped the suicide bomber. Several suspects have already been nabbed. Their identity, though, has still not been revealed. The next question, who orchestrated the blast? The answer really depends on whom you ask. In the hours following the blast, a couple of members of the Tehreek-e-Taliban, or TTP, said the blast was revenge for what? The death of TTP leader Khalid Khorasani. Does that mean that the TTP planned and carried out this blast? The terror group's main spokesperson, however, says no. So then who's behind the blast? The last time there was a blast inside a mosque in Pakistan, the IS, or the Islamic State, had claimed responsibility. That was way back in August 2022. 67 people had died back then. Then as well, it was a mosque in Peshawar. But it's important to note that a lot has changed between then and now. Today, the situation in Pakistan has become absolutely desperate. There's a massive economic crisis. Consumer prices are up 27.5% year on year. 27.5%. The country is running out of food. Electricity and foreign reserves are also, well, the electricity has been off for a long time. Foreign exchange reserves down to just $3 billion or thereabouts. Reports say that Pakistan is left with just enough money to pay for 3 weeks of imports. That's the level of foreign exchange reserves. What happens after that? There's really no answer to this question. We have a real situation where a country like Pakistan, a nuclear weapons power, one of the larger countries in the world, could actually be facing bankruptcy in just a couple of weeks from now. There's an argument taking place constantly between the IMF and Pakistan. The IMF says whatever it is that Pakistan is promising is not enough. It's not credible. We need to see more. We need to see the assets of senior bureaucrats. Now, Pakistan has taken some steps. It's devalued its currency, for example. It's devalued its currency by 15%. But is it going to be enough? Is it going to be enough to get that bailout with Pakistan so desperately needed? The IMF is there and playing hardball. The IMF has also said that Pakistan is going to grow by just 2% this year, which is opposed to the 3.5% that was earlier being expected. And now, in the middle of all of this, there's terrorism back again. Yes, I know everyone can look and say Pakistan has only itself to blame. You're going to encourage terrorism for decade after decade. You're going to use it as a weapon of state policy against both your neighbors. You use it against India. You use it against Afghanistan. At some point, it is going to come back to haunt you. And that's frankly a valid point. Because let's take a look at what happens now. What does a terror attack in the middle of a financial crisis mean for Pakistan? What do speculations of an insider hand mean for a country that is actually counting on an international bailout right now? The FATF, or the Financial Action Task Force, is surely watching these developments very closely. So, of course, is the rest of the world. So is neighbor India. New Delhi has been in the know of the deteriorating situation in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa ever since the Taliban came to power in Kabul. India has been warning about it. India has been saying if the Taliban takes over, it's not necessarily going to be good news for anyone, perhaps not even for Pakistan. And again, those are chickens that are now coming home to roost. We've seen the situation in Pakistan go from bad to worse ever since the Taliban came. We've been seeing provinces near Afghanistan becoming a revolving door for terrorism. The TTP, for example, has regrouped now. The terror group has tightened its hold over certain regions. It's even declared a parallel government. It is an understatement to say that Pakistan is a security threat for the region. We've known that for a long time. But frankly, this entire situation is now a security threat and an existential threat for Pakistan itself. Is realization finally going to dawn at some point on policymakers in Pakistan that a course correction is required? And if that realization comes, is it too late? Because let's face it, the present economic situation in Pakistan and the Peshawar blast, these are rude reminders to the world, which doesn't really need too much reminding, that the Pakistani security situation has become as desperate as its economic situation. And it's a moot point as to which of them is worse. To discuss this story, I'm now being joined by Lisa Curtis. She's a senior fellow and director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at CNAS. She's also worked as a senior advisor in the South Asian Bureau of the U.S. State Department. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Just wanted to get your sense of what's happening in Pakistan. It seems to be a rather grim situation, of course, on the economic front. And then there's this terror attack, which brings back memories of a equally dark time for Pakistan when terror really seemed to be ruling and the TTP was all over the place.
Yes, Pakistan is facing multiple crises right now. One in terms of the economy, which they're seeing, falling foreign exchange reserves. They're at risk of defaulting. They're trying to negotiate an IMF bailout, but they'll need to take the hard steps that the IMF is demanding in terms of cutting subsidies, raising taxes. So, the question is, will Pakistan finally bite the bullet and take some of these steps that the IMF has been demanding so that they can avoid a default, much like we saw in Sri Lanka? We don't want Pakistan to go the way that Sri Lanka went last year. So they're facing these economic challenges. At the same time, there's been this major horrible terrorist attack in Peshawar that was conducted on a police base at a mosque. And most of the victims, perhaps as many as 100 victims, were police officers, government employees. And this is a terrible attack. I think the Pakistan government believes it was conducted by the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the TTP, which has been escalating its attacks inside Pakistan ever since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan next door. So I think, the question is, are we seeing Pakistan return to the state that we saw 10 years ago when we saw almost weekly attacks by the TTP? And, how can we ensure that Pakistan remains stable and is able to thwart this growing threat from the TTP?
All right, Lisa, let's just look at each of those 2 points in some detail. I mean, let's just remember what Hillary Clinton said not that long back. If you keep snakes in your backyard, then you can't be surprised if those snakes are going to bite you at some point. There are many who will say what's happening in Pakistan is exactly that. Your chickens are coming home to roost. Pakistan has encouraged terrorism and backed the Taliban for year after year, for decade after decade, and now Pakistan is paying the price for those faulty policies.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. Look, many of us warned that there would be blowback from a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, that the impact wouldn't just be devastating for the people of Afghanistan, which we're certainly seeing with the rollback of women's rights, the closing of universities to women, just horrible things happening to the Afghan people inside Afghanistan. But the blowback is reaching out into the region and perhaps, beyond, because that is, the fact is, other jihadist organizations are inspired by the Taliban's ability to take control of Afghanistan. They see it as the Taliban were victorious against the US and all the NATO countries. And so they feel the wind is at their back. And I think that's what we are seeing. The TTP is inspired, and the Taliban isn't cracking down on the TTP bases inside Afghanistan. I think maybe Pakistan assumed that they would get cooperation from the Taliban, since they, of course, had provided safe haven to the Taliban for the 20 years that the U.S. was fighting in Afghanistan. But apparently that doesn't seem to be the case. But I think you're right. Many of us had warned about this blowback, but we're now, really seeing it play out.
Well, again, as I said, a lot of people did think it was a matter of time that encouragement of terror is going to sometimes come back and bite Pakistan itself. Now, there's an interesting question which arises from that when it comes to India. There have been some noises from inside Pakistan almost indicating that it is time for peace with India. Let's try and have a rapprochement. We are hemmed in from all sides. It's not that peace overtures or noises have not been made in the past, but this time, given how desperate the situation is for Pakistan, do you expect that Pakistan will actually try and reach out and say, let's try and have some sort of a settlement with India because we're desperate. We can't afford to be in this situation anymore. We're surrounded from all sides.
Well, I think an effort to, build peace talks, or, at least start with, some kind of peace gesture would certainly be in Pakistan's interest. And we have seen this current government led by Shehbaz Sharif. We've seen the PMLN extend a hand of friendship to India in the past. We have seen their interest in having better relations between Pakistan and India. And of course, the foreign minister, Bilawal Bhutto, part of the PPP, has also often reached out for peace talks with India in the past. So this would not be something unexpected from the current government. And I also think it would be in India's interest to try to build some kind of rapport with Pakistan that could perhaps eventually lead to more peaceful, normal relations between India and Pakistan. It's not going to be easy. It won't happen overnight. But, India faces pressure from China on its line of actual control with China. We saw the clashes in 2020 at Galwan. We saw a recent clash. Fortunately, it didn't result in deaths, but we did see a border clash near Tawang in India's state of Arunachal Pradesh. So it would be in India's interest to not have to deal with a tense border situation with both of its neighbors, China on one side, Pakistan on the other. So it would certainly be in India's interest as well to try to pursue some kind of normalization with Pakistan.
Well, I have to say, Lisa, it's not necessarily a government that's going to be, particularly adopting a softer approach to Pakistan, although it can be said that because this is a tough government and a hardline government, it can reach out to Pakistan just as Nixon did with China. But at least the immediate response from India has not been particularly conciliatory. There's not talk about renegotiating the Indus Water Treaty, for example, and a very clear stance from India saying, if Pakistan really wants to have any friendship, you have got to stop encouraging terrorism. Do it for our sake, do it for your own sake.
Well, I think that's right. I think that the current Modi government, does not seem particularly interested in sticking its neck out for a peace process. And of course, Prime Minister Modi and previous Indian governments have been burned in the past when they have tried to reach out to Pakistan, and then a terrorist attack happens in India shortly thereafter. So they will be cautious, and I think that the onus is on Pakistan. If Pakistan really wants to pursue some kind of normalization, they'll have to make the first move, because India has been burned too many times. by Pakistan on this front. So they would really need to see some sincerity of purpose from all parts of the Pakistan government, because let's remember, the military has traditionally been in control of the policies related to India, nuclear weapons, Kashmir, Afghanistan, all of those important issues. So India would need to see commitment from not only the civil leadership, but also the military leadership.
But Lisa, I think it has to be said that while Pakistan is in a desperate situation and it needs to have peace with India, in India, the priority isn't quite that high. The focus is more on China. Pakistan's sort of gone off the radar. It's a small country. It's an irritant. The Indian economy cannot compare. Pakistan doesn't loom that high in Indian policymakers' thinking anymore. So therefore, the desire to go out and do something dramatic to have peace to Pakistan is not really there anymore, not in India.
Yeah, well, again, I think that comes back to the point that the onus would be on Pakistan. Pakistan would have to decide this is something that it really wants. It's willing to go the extra mile to try to seek some kind of normalization with India. And I also might point out, this would help with Pakistan's relationship with the United States, because we see that Pakistan doesn't want to be wholly reliant on China. They've seen the drawbacks of the China-Pakistan economic corridor. This is part of the reason that their economy is doing so badly, because they have over-relied on China for project assistance. So I think if Pakistan makes a sincere attempt to try to normalize relations with India, this will go a long way toward improving U.S.-Pakistan relations, which I think is something of interest to Pakistani leaders, so that they don't have as their only option China.
All right, Lisa, last question. The economic situation is desperate. Pakistan's asking for a bailout. Now, a lot of people, perhaps somewhat unkindly, are going to say that what Pakistan's strategy in dealing with these bankruptcy-type situations is, it says, we're a nuclear power, we've got nuclear missiles. Do you really want us to go under? Do you really want jihadists or extremists to have nuclear weapons? It's a sort of, I'm going to have a gun to my own head, and if you don't help me, the trigger can be pressed, and all of us could be affected because of that. So therefore, you've got to come out with a bailout package, and you've got to help us.
I don't think Pakistan has that option right now. The U.S. does not have troops inside Afghanistan. We don't rely on Pakistan to resupply troops through the overland routes to Afghanistan. So I don't see that Pakistan really has that kind of leverage. Yeah, nobody wants to see Pakistan blow up, but neither do Pakistanis and the Pakistani leadership. So I think that Pakistan has a lot less leverage with the United States now that the U.S. no longer has troops inside Afghanistan.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.